Good day. I am Asnara Ardisuma and I'm here today to discuss about behavioral analysis. I assume you already have an idea on what this lesson is all about. So the first question to ponder is, why behaviorism? Well, for behaviorists, they believe that for psychology to be fully scientific, it should focus solely on overt behavior and on how people respond to external stimuli, and that unconscious or conscious forces don't matter because they can be seen, manipulated, or measured under laboratory conditions. Whereas they believe that psychology should be based scientifically by testing empirical evidences. Also, for behaviorists, personality is merely an accumulation of learned responses to various stimuli and refers only to what can be objectively observed and manipulated. So unlike psychodynamic theories, behaviorism solely focuses on observable behaviors and disregarding the impact of other internal forces or drives. So to further elaborate this, I'll be using B.F. Skinner's behavioral approach in the succeeding slides. But before that, let us first briefly know the origin of behavioral analysis. So there are two prominent behaviorists who started this all. First is Ivan Pavlov. I bet everyone is familiar with him and his work. He was the first one who coined the term conditioning and discovered the salivation of dog whenever a bell rang. He also formulated the fundamental law of learning, which means a conditioned response can be established in the absence of reinforcement. Second one is John B. Watson, who adapted Pavlov's ideas as the basic research method. He focused solely on overt behavior and how people respond to external stimuli. His work was the Little Albert experiment, which resulted for fear response, which I believe most of you, if not all, are familiar with. But if you want to know more about them, attached in this video are links of their biography. The second question to ponder is, why animals? Well, B.F. Skinner is known for using animals in his study. He attempted to understand personality through laboratory research with rats and pigeons rather than clinical works with patients, because he believed that responding to stimuli is something animals do well. He had also admitted that human behavior is more complex than animal behavior, but suggested that their differences are in degree, not in kind, and that their fundamental process is similar. Also, since science must proceed from simple to complex behavior, the more elemental should be studied first, so it is from animal. Before proceeding, let us first get to know B.F. Skinner, who is dubbed as the father of operant conditioning and followed the ideas of Watson and Thorndike. His real name is Boros Friedrich Skinner and was born on March 20, 1904 in Pennsylvania. He is the first child and had a brother who died when he was first-year college. He lived in a comfortable, happy, upper-middle-class home and practiced the values of temperance, service, honesty, and hard work. Their religion as a child is Presbyterian but never practiced religion when he grew up. He faced two major identity crises. First, he had a great interest in literature, thus when he finished college, he aspired to become a writer and spent a year in their attic, but to no avail, he wrote nothing, and which he considered it as his dark year. And he then found interest in behaviorism when he read some works of Watson and Pavlov. The second major identity crisis he faced was his experiences about Project Pigeon and the Baby Tender. And then finally, he wrote Walden 2, a utopian novel, which provided him an immediate therapy and solved his dark year after 20 years. Since they believed that behaviorism should be scientifically proven, they insisted that psychology must avoid internal forces and confine itself to observable physical events. Although he never denied its existence, Skinner insisted that psychology must avoid internal mental factors and can be best studied without reference to needs, instinct, or motives. There are two types of conditioning: classical conditioning and operant conditioning. In classical conditioning, behavior is elicited. It is a form of learning whereby conditioned stimulus becomes associated with an unrelated unconditioned stimulus in order to produce a behavioral response known as conditioned response. It involves placing a neutral signal before a naturally occurring reflex. In Pavlov's classical experiment with dogs, the neutral signal was the sound of the bell, and the naturally occurring reflex was salivating the response to food. By associating the neutral stimulus with the environmental stimulus, which is the food, the sound alone could produce the salivation response. While in operant conditioning, the behavior is imitated. It employs rewards and punishments, and through this, an association is made between a behavior and a consequence for that behavior. To elaborate, let's use the Skinner's box. When a food-deprived rat is placed in the box, its behavior at first is spontaneous and random. He is active, sniffing, poking, and exploring, so these behaviors are imitated and that the rat is not responding to any specific stimulus. But during his exploration on the box, the rat accidentally pressed a lever, causing a food pellet to drop, and that had changed his behavior. The rat now begins to press the bar more often, which means the food is the reinforcer and made the rat less random and spontaneous. We have to note that the person who controls the reinforcers controls the subject's behavior. An important aspect of operant conditioning is shaping. It is a step-by-step procedure of reinforcing different behavior until the ultimate behavior is achieved. For example, teaching new tricks to a dog or teaching a kid how to walk. So in reinforcement, it strengthens the behavior and rewards the person. We have to note that reinforcement and reward are not synonymous because not every behavior that is reinforced is rewarding or pleasing to the person. Example, when people are reinforced for working but many find their job boring, uninteresting, and unrewarding. There are two types of reinforcement, the positive reinforcement and negative reinforcement. The positive reinforcement means the addition of pleasant stimulus. For example, if you do a good job at work and your manager gives you a bonus, that bonus is a positive reinforcement. While negative reinforcement means the removal of unpleasant stimulus. For example, when you turn off your alarm in the morning because it pisses you off. Another one is punishment. It is the presentation of an aversive stimulus, and it is imposed to prevent people from acting in a particular way. It is a process by which a consequence immediately follows a behavior which decreases the future frequency of that behavior. Effects of punishment includes suppressing the behavior, conditioning of negative feeling, and the spread of its effects. There are also two types of punishment. The positive punishment, which means a work by presenting an aversive consequences after an undesired behavior is exhibited. For example, a child touches a hot stove and feels pain. Then the second one is the negative punishment, which means a certain reinforcing stimulus is removed after a particular undesired behavior is exhibited. For example, a child fights with her brother and his favorite toy was taken away.
To further elaborate, let's watch this video. We can draw the four options in a table. If reinforcement is positive, we add something pleasant, like a cookie, to increase the likelihood of a behavior. If reinforcement is negative, we still want to increase the desired behavior, this time by removing something unpleasant, like the leash. If punishment is positive, we add an unpleasant response to decrease behavior. When punishment is negative, we also want to decrease behavior, now by removing something pleasant, like the comfy carpet. If we stop any sort of manipulation, the conditioned behavior will eventually disappear again. This is called extinction.
So to ensure that the ultimate behavior is achieved, schedule of reinforcement must be followed. It is basically a rule stating which instances of behavior will be reinforced. There are two types of schedule, the continuous schedule and the intermittent schedule. The continuous schedule, the desired behavior is reinforced every single time in the course, and it is best used during initial stages of learning to create a strong association between the behavior and the response. While the intermittent or partial schedule, the response is reinforced only part of the time, and it produces responses that are more resistant to extinction. There are four basic intermittent schedules: the fixed ratio, variable ratio, fixed interval, and the variable interval. Fixed ratio is a response is reinforced only after a specified number of responses. For example, the allowance to a bricklayer who received a fixed amount of money for each brick they laid. Second is variable ratio. It occurs when a response is reinforced after an unpredictable number of responses. For example, gambling and playing slot machines. Third is the fixed interval. The first response is rewarded only after a specified amount of time has elapsed. For example, when you are being paid per hour. And the last one is the variable interval. It occurs when a response is rewarded after an unpredictable amount of time has passed. For example, self-employed person being paid at unpredictable times. A conditioned behavior may fall into extinction. This means the gradual weakening of a conditioned response may decrease or disappear. For example, imagine you taught your dog to shake hands. Over time, your trick becomes less interesting. Also, human behavior is controlled by environmental contingencies that may have been erected by society, an individual, or by oneself, but we have to note that environment is responsible for behavior. There are two types of control of human behavior. First is social control. As we have observed, there are lots of social groups in our community, and this is because it tends to be reinforcing. Yet, this group tends to control their members by having rules or laws. So it is believed that each one of us is controlled by a variety of social forces and techniques. First is operant conditioning, which we have just discussed. Second is describing contingencies of reinforcement, which involves language. Third is deprivation and satiation. And lastly, physical restraint, such as holding children back from a deep ravine. In self-control, this means when people control their own behavior, they do so by manipulating the same thing they would use in controlling someone else's behavior. Skinner believed that self-control can be freely chosen, so he postulated several techniques without resulting to free choice. First, they can use physical aids to alter their environment. Second, they can change their environment. Third, they can arrange their environment so that they can escape from an aversive stimulus. Third, they can take drugs as a means of self-control. And fifth, they can just simply do something else to avoid behaving in an undesirable way. But those techniques sometimes produces detrimental effects that may result in an inappropriate behavior and unhealthy personality. Such as inappropriate behaviors, which includes excessively vigorous behavior, excessively restrained behavior, blacking out reality, defective self-knowledge, and self-punishment. Inappropriate behaviors are learned and shaped by positive or negative reinforcement and effects of punishment. So also, when social control is excessive, people can use three basic strategies. They can escape, revolt, or use passive resistance. Though, Skinner believed that the latter is most likely to be used as its conspicuous feature is stubbornness. So for summary, behavioral analysis only lies on overt or observable behaviors to which it can be conditioned or shaped through reinforcement and punishment. Skinner never denied the existence of internal drives, but it cannot be used as an explanation of behavior. Furthermore, Skinner held a deterministic view in human nature in which he believed that people are not free but are controlled by environmental forces, and that people are primarily products of learning, shaped more by external variables than genetic factors. In personality development, it is largely shaped by the environment despite the important role of genetics. Skinner inclines more on social factor because social environments such as family structure, early experiences, and others played an even more important role in the development of our personality. He also held the belief that humans are not by nature good, but they can become one depending on their environment. So, operant conditioning is not just something that takes place in experimental settings. It also plays a powerful role in our everyday learning. Reinforcement and punishment take place in natural settings all the time, as well as in more structured settings such as classrooms or therapy sessions. Keep also in mind that the environment we are in plays a pivotal role in our behavior. That would be all. Thank you.